Welcome to the On the Edge podcast with your host, Scott Groves. Hey everyone, it's Scott Groves with the On the Edge podcast, and I'm here with my longtime friend. I think that counts 8 months. That seems long. Susan Goebel. She is the owner. Get this, of Scaling Management Consulting Group, which came up because she needed the SEO. So we have all the words of all the things she does. Scaling Management Consulting Group in the business title. But the way that I always describe it is Susan places fractional COOs. So when you need a chief operating officer or you need an operations manager and your side hustle or your self-employed business or your small corporation hasn't quite grown to the size where you can drop 100, 200, 300 grand that it takes to get kind of an entry-level operations manager or COO, you go to Susan, she finds somebody so you can kind of pay by the hour or by the month or whatever the case may be, and it's epic. I've been working with Susan for a little bit under a year as we hired a fractional COO and a fractional operations manager, and I got to tell you, even though I quote-unquote only get 10 or 12 hours of work a week out of them, it's like having a full-time employee. So other than that, she comes from London, Canada, not London, England, which is the fake London, as some people have described it. I think it's way cold in Canada. She said it's not that cold, so that's good. We're going to dig into that. She's got a wonderful 11-year-old daughter. And what did I miss in the Reader's Digest introduction of Susan? Susan?
I think you only missed the puppy dog. The
puppy dog, Leo. I forgot about Leo. How could I forget about Leo? Cool. So tell us what's going on. First of all, we're recording this, the latter quarter of 2022. Give us the update in Canada, in business, in your business, like what's happening in Susan's world? What's in focus?
Oh my gosh. Do you know what I absolutely love to do, Scott?
What's that?
I love to read.
Really?
It's terrible.
I know.
I like to be educated, and I have a favorite topic right now. I've got books downstairs and I'm just diving into them, all about generations and the generations in the workforce in particular. So when we talk about business, it is a fascinating topic from the great generation all the way through to the Gen Zs. And I looked at around the kitchen table when I was doing a family event recently. We're all actually represented. No wonder we can never communicate.
Right. Yeah, because Gen Z, Gen X, baby boomers all communicate in very different ways. They all have very strong opinions about other generations. I feel like the millennials and the Gen Ys and the Gen Zs, they're getting a little bit of unadulterated, maybe misplaced hate from the baby boomers. And somewhere like if you were born prior to 79, 78, you kind of hate the whole generation of people that came up with smartphones and computers and whatnot. So I'm guessing you're doing this for kind of like work study. What are you learning about generations?
Oh my goodness. They do not like one another. And the way they communicate is super interesting. Like my daughter, she's 11. She's going to be called a Gen Z, right? She'll never know the day when a phone, even though we call it a phone still, you actually put it to your ear and talk to people.
Right.
A phone goes here, don't we? I mean, we look at the people. When it's broken, it's confusing.
Right. Or you don't even look at them and talk. It's all text and emojis and it's a different type of, I heard somebody describe emojis are the modern day hieroglyphics, where like pretty soon we're going to have a whole generation and a whole workforce of people that are just like smiley face, pyramid, eggplant, and you have to like decipher, did they just tell me good job or did they tell me to F off? Like I got to decipher what the hieroglyphics from this Gen Zer were meant to tell me. And I'm their boss. Like, you're supposed to pick up the phone and call me, not send me 9 emojis and have me try to decipher these hieroglyphics. Like it is a real problem. And I'm sure this is something you're addressing in your business when you place fractional COOs with founders or business owners. Like that connect's got to be hard, right? Because I'm that weird, not quite Gen Xer. I was born like between 78 and 84 is this weird like in between where we had the Oregon Trail on computers, so we kind of grew up with computers, but I didn't get my first cell phone till I was 20 years old in the Army. So it's like I'm in this weird in between generation. And then I would guess Bob, who you partnered me with as my COO, he's more of that kind of prototypical baby boomer in his 60s. And it's like, we get along super well. But the people just 5 or 6 years younger than me, we don't even speak the same language. So tell me about these challenges and like how you're learning about generational shifts for your business.
You're so right. we were talking about it in terms of our clientele. So the avatar we typically serve of the smaller businesses, they tend to be more millennials, older Gen Zs. But my avatar for fractional COOs and integrators tend to be, I'm a Gen Xer. So I'm not even a cusper. I'm true Gen X. And then, as you know, with Bob is a baby boomer. And the suite that we have for those COOs, because they've done 20 years in industry, they've got a bunch of experience under their belt. They tend to be a little bit older. Came through the pipe one day with a lead, and this is where the spark of the conversation started. Had this great conversation, paired him with someone, actually paired him with Bob, had a little great meeting, and the conversation came back, and it was my favorite quote, and I still use it, even though it was 6 months ago. I loved Bob. There was just an energy offset. In other words, you thought Bob was old.
Right.
Bob was not old. The problem you were expressing in your business was that you keep hitting the same ceiling over and over again. You're a serial entrepreneur. You've hit 4 million several times. I want to pair you with a guy who can take you to the next level, and he's it. He's got the depth of experience that you need to guide you to that next level, but you didn't want to actually do that.
Right.
So it's fascinating. So when we want to communicate with our clients, Scott, yourself, and others, it's really a matter of, okay, well, how do I need to communicate with you? I'm an old fart. I'm okay with saying that, right?
Yeah.
I'm a Gen Xer, but I know I communicate differently, and I know that I'm, as a Gen Xer with latchkey kids and all that, I'm fiercely independent.
Right.
That's part of what we do as a generation, whereas millennials, they're a little bit different, a lot more community building. So when you're communicating with them and your team members who tend to be younger at this point in time, right? They're millennials and Gen Zs. So when our COOs and operations managers go into businesses, a lot of the population that they're dealing with tend to be millennials. How do you help communicate, and how do you deal with diversity? Because the baby boomers and the millennials think very different about diversity in the workplace,
right,
as an example.
Right. And so let's talk about who you serve quickly, and then maybe we can talk about how you serve them. So when I got introduced to you by our friend Amber Vilhauer, shout out to NG Enterprises. Yeah, she was telling me, she's like, if it's your side hustle, maybe the number's 500,000. If you're like a solo entrepreneur, maybe it's 1 million. But there's this founder's dilemma, to reference the book, where eventually the founder, and I run a coaching business as my side hustle. I'm still doing 30, 40, 50, 60 hours a week in the mortgage business. But as my side hustle, I have this great coaching program. We have great clients. We have a great product or service that we sell. But as the founder, plus my buddy Chris, who has been the catch-all for technology and marketing and the whole 9 yards, you get to a certain plateau where it's like, all right, well, now we have to bring in some real professionals, right? Can you tell us where the founder hits that ceiling, whether it be, revenue or time, or maybe some business dilemma where they start looking for somebody like you? It's like, hey, I've gotten it this far. I'm self-aware enough to know that I can't get it to the next level myself. I've got to find somebody like a Susan to help me, get some professional help. I don't need a coach. I work really hard. I'm motivated. I love my product, but just in building the business, I'm a little lost because I'm stuck at X. What does that X usually end up being, where people have to look to people like you to serve them?
That's a great question, Scott. And so we actually see that there's some very interesting demarcations. If you're under 1 million, if you're making 250,000 to 750,000 annual in revenue, you definitely want somebody on your team. But if you are making $250,000, you probably can't afford to have somebody on your team. But sometimes you have those strategic questions and you just need that go-to.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that? That mark in between the 250 and 750,000 is fraught with so many different challenges for founders. They're looking at product market fit. What's the best way to attract and retain my customers, my clients? How do I serve them best? There's only so many hours in a week. Is this a side hustle? Is it really a full-time thing? I don't know yet. Once they hit 800,000 in annual revenue, between 800,000 and 1.2, you've figured out your product market fit. You've figured out how your clients come into you, who you best serve. Usually you've got some systems in place, but now things are starting to break down because there's only so many hours. You are either going to break through and grow, if that's your true desire. Not everybody's desire is growth. or you're going to scale back, right? It's the E-myth. We see it every single day.
Can you explain,
really
for those that aren't familiar or never read the book, The E-Myth, which is like required reading for anybody that wants to be an entrepreneur, can you explain to people what the E-Myth is?
The E-Myth talks about the journey of that solopreneur who's great and having a skill set. So they talk about plumbers and electricians and whatnot as an easy way to think about this. They grow a business because they've got a skill set. They know what they need to do. Now they're growing the business. They might be bringing on a few team members to deal with the extra clients because they've done a great job. Excellent. But you get to a point where you are no longer able to scale that business because you're trading time for money. How do you change the business? What is the glass ceiling that you need to break through? And so you either break through and you become the owner, the CEO, the founder of the business, or you usually hit the glass ceiling and you go back down. And now you're back to being the technician again.
Yeah.
So you're the operator in the business.
So let's go back to that plumber example, right? Like, because I've seen this exact scenario play out where I had a home warranty. I don't know if you're familiar with those up in Canada because you guys do real estate much different than here. But when you buy a house in America, usually the seller will pay for a home warranty. It keeps them out of lawsuits so that if something breaks, you have this warranty where a company will come in and fix it, right? And we had the day, a month after we closed escrow, the hot water heater exploded. And this is like a big, 200-gallon hot water heater with a regulator that pressure pushes hot water throughout the house during the hours that you're most likely to need a hot shower so that you're not waiting there for 15 minutes for cold water or whatever the case may be. I mean, it was an expensive job. And this guy came out and he was a pro. He had all the tools, great customer service, dressed well, explained the problem, like went above and beyond, like just an amazing plumber. And so I happened to be working in the garage, working on like a podcast thing. And he's like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I'm like, "I'm a coach and I do mortgages." And he's like, "Yeah." And he just starts offering up his life story. He's like, "Basically, I'm the world's best plumber, but I suck at lead generation. So I just sign up with like these home warranty companies and these third-party aggregators of leads for plumbers." Cause he's like, "I can do a great job. I can make 150, 200 grand a year being the world's best plumber. But I know the company that's doing the lead generation, they're making a couple $1 million, right?" And it was just kind of this resignation from him of like, I'm this great solo technician, but he'll never grow to the person who can schedule out 5 other technicians, generate his own leads, bring his brand to other people. So and by the way, even in California, that's a pretty good living, $150,000 to $200,000 doing a trade. I mean, you can own a house, like you can have a great living, you can provide for your children. But if that guy ever got the mindset of like, no, I want to build my own plumbing company, this might be where he brings in people like you.
And that's exactly the case. You're at that critical juncture. Now you need to take a different step with your business. So that's when I would say the first step that you need to do, though, is not hire a fractional COO. What?
Right.
You need to just have somebody you can call on a regular basis. Maybe it's once a month because you're not ready. Who's the first hire you need to do? You need to sit down and do the thinking time. I had a great conversation with a lead yesterday. The guy was at $1.2 million for his business. He's in a great space and he's never done any business planning. His business is ripe for doing an awful lot because he can definitely scale that to beyond 8 figures. But you need the right people to think, then you need the right people to do. Right, Scott, you and I had this conversation way back, almost a year ago now, and said, you need the team first because the team's going to put you in good standing, and that you were the size of business that was an okay thing to do. Not everybody is. There's quite a spectrum in there. We want to make sure that when we're offering those pieces of guidance over the 800K mark, that's when you're ready for something. But depending on what your team consists of, does it consist most of marketers? Does it consist of operations people at all with any set level of skill set? Does it consist of coaching? Whatever your business is, we need to then make sure that you have the right expertise. Yeah. Is it a COO? Are you ready for a COO or Are you not?
Yeah. And I don't mind sharing kind of the numbers where we were, where we're going, what the plan is, like whatever. Anybody, the 23 people that listen to this podcast, they can know everything about my finances. I could care less. I actually feel like I came to you all a little bit prematurely than maybe most businesses were, mainly because the coaching business is my side hustle, but I want to provide an amazing professional product. And I don't mind giving up a larger percentage of our income and revenue to staffing and growth, because I have my primary source of income with is mortgage. So my numbers might be a couple $100,000 premature, but I think it's a decent case study to talk about. So, in we're in 2022. So in 2020, I had about $500,000 in gross revenue. No freaking clue what the profit margin was, because like my books were out of shape. Like my bookkeeper's yelling at me. I have no idea, And then there's a lot of expenses where it's like, well, was paying for Zoom a coaching expense or a mortgage expense? Because you meet with mortgage clients on Zoom and you meet with coaching clients on Zoom, right? So it was all disjointed and confusing. And that's kind of when I first started hearing your name and talking to some people and getting some references for a fractional COO. And then at the end of 2021, November, December, we took in a huge amount of revenue because a lot of loan officers, we coach loan officers and realtors, a lot of people decided they wanted to pay for the upcoming year in advance, which was probably a good plan because in 2022, we've been getting shellacked in the like just beat upside the face with interest rates rising. So at the end of 2021, I took in a couple $100,000 of revenue that took us to about $800,000 of revenue in 2021. Plus, my bookkeeper was on my butt to actually do a better job. So after we paid for expenses and travel and live events and all the craziness, it's so much more expensive to run a coaching business than I thought. We were probably at like net profit to me of that 800,000 was maybe $300,000 in revenue, which is amazing for a side hustle. I'm super blessed. Love our coaching clients. I can't say enough good things about that and like what we've grown. And shout out to Chris for being there from the beginning to do all the nominal tasks that just got the program up and running. But, it took 6.5 years to grow this funnel of business to where, we probably had about $300,000 in profit. And I was looking at it and I was like, well, I don't want to grow just for the sake of growing, but all of my expenses are pretty much fixed. So if I can double the top line number of, 800,000 to $1.6 million, I'll quadruple my bottom line number in profit because there's really no extra expense. I have some Zoom accounts, maybe the cost of the live events scale a little bit. I got to send out a few extra t-shirts and hats because we have new coaching clients. But for the most part, I was looking at this and I'm like, hey, we could get this from 800,000 to $1.5 million, 2 million, 2.5 million, but I really don't know how to do that. I'm in this founder's dilemma, right? Where I'm just like, all right, cool. I know how to coach. I know how to get on stage and give people great advice. I know how to hold each other accountable, but like, I don't know how the F to do Facebook marketing and like Bob asked a couple questions when we started. He's like, so where's our budget and like our net profit? I'm like, budget? What's a budget? He's like, your business doesn't have a budget. He's like, how are you bringing in so much revenue? And you're such an idiot. And I'm like, it's amazing. I tell him, trust me, barely graduated high school, but somehow we figured it out. So, now it looks like we're on track for somewhere around, depending on how November, December, when a lot of our clients pay in advance for the year, we're somewhere around probably $1 million in revenue this year. So we've grown by, 25% in a down year for the mortgage industry. And I'm excited to report that I actually know what my net profit is. Our net profit's like in the high 30% range. So on every dollar we make, like, about 38% is coming to my wife and I's pocket, after all expenses, which is insane. So if I can scale this, yes, and selfishly, if I can scale this to $2 million and basically completely replace my mortgage income, I can give more and more of my mortgage income to the gals that have worked so hard for me for a couple of years. That's, my selfish motivation is to make more money on the coaching so that I can be altruistic and give more money to the people on the mortgage side of the house. So tell me where I was thinking about this right, where I was thinking about this wrong, where I was a little premature, what's working, what's not, using that kind of case study of the last 3 years, going from $500,000 in revenue to $1 million in revenue. And now we're really in a place to scale. What did I do right? What did I do wrong?
Well, first you called us. You did that right. You took some advice. So yay.
Yes. Yay for us.
But I just want to celebrate your numbers because look at that. 38% profit is where you should wind up. You're doing great. And as absolutely, your industry has gotten smacked this year so bad from February on, and you've got 25 to 30% growth.
Yeah.
right? That's to be celebrated. That's amazing. And I bet Bob made you know your numbers, and I bet you do things like quarterly planning and all of those
just stupid business stuff that I'm supposed to do. Yeah. I'm like supposed to project revenue. I'm like, I don't know. Stripe comes in and then it gets paid. And then like something that we found out is he was a little bit worried about our net profit. And I was like, oh yeah, well, don't forget there's that $6,000 repayment. He's like, what $6,000 repayment? I was like, well, Stripe offered to give me $100,000 up front for a very low fee. And then I would pay back like $5,000 or $6,000 a month for a year and a half. And I wanted that $100,000 because there was an amazing investment opportunity in an apartment building in Savannah, Georgia. And, the minimum was X and I didn't have X. So I basically borrowed $100,000 from Stripe, which is our credit card processing company, based against, secured against future revenues. And he's like, oh, shoot. He's like, I didn't even realize that was disappearing off the top of the monthly deposit. So when we put back in that $6,000, which is basically just raw profit because it's a payback of money I've already taken out of the company, he's like, yeah, your profit margin went from like 22 to 38%. We went from like, I'm a little scared to, man, that's world class in a service business to have that level of profit. And that's like something I wasn't even thinking about, much less tracking. And he's like, yeah, these are the conversations we need to have every week, buddy. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like running a real business. So yeah. Bob,
not a side hustle anymore.
Yeah.
It's an actual real growing and scaling business. And it's going to meet those needs for a long time because that's not going to be, you're going to pay that back.
Right.
And then where does the profit go, right? It goes back into investing in the company and whatnot. And you have it there to be able to make sure you've got, the emergency fund or whatever you need to do because industries go up and industries go down.
Totally. And by the way, can I tell you when I realized this was a real business? A couple years ago, we were updating our trust with our lawyer because we hadn't put, who we wanted to be the guardians of our second kid. I don't think we had even added Alina to the trust yet. And he's like, and if something happens, who gets consolidated coaching? I'm like, what do you mean who gets it? If I die, it just dies. And he's like, no, man, if you get hit by a bus, you have this business that's spinning off $500,000 of revenue. Even if there's only $200,000 worth of profit left over, don't you want some of that to go to one of your coaching clients who takes over the coaching business? And some of it goes back to your wife, who's a 50% owner of the company. I'm like, oh yeah, my wife having like an extra $100,000 a year in revenue. If I got hit by a bus, that would be a good thing. So she just doesn't have to totally live off the life insurance or go back and get a job so she can take care of the kids. And it was at that moment where I'm like, oh, I got to write my business interests into my trust. This is crazy. This is like a real thing. This is like a real child. It's like Pinocchio became a real boy at that meeting. And that shortly after that is when I got in touch with you. And so we've kind of named our succession plan. I have 2 coaching clients that will take over the coaching business because they've been around for about 5-6 years in the coaching business. And they could really replicate what I'm doing with kind of the team and the framework that we have. Yeah, it's crazy. Like it became a real business. And then Bob's making it into a real business.
Well, that's Bob's job. So way to go, Bob.
Totally. So why don't you tell us real quick? Finish your thought on what I did right and what I did wrong.
Well, I just wanted to point out one of the right things that you just talked about. The succession planning is a conversation that not enough people have, right? You've got this business, and even if it's your primary business, there's a lot of people out there that aren't having conversations with their legal professionals to make sure they have the living will for the business. A few years ago, I had no idea when I was a solopreneur. I was like, I don't know. What do you mean? What do I have to have that? Mm-hmm. Right. But of course, you want to make sure your family, the remaining members and whoever, they're well taken care of. And you've got to have those conversations. That's where some of the things like Bob come in. You have those chitty chats, right?
Yeah.
But one of the interesting pieces, though, about your structure for your business when we started was that you also had people on the inside of your business that had an operation bent to them, right? So you had other people from their mortgage business that were helping out in consolidated coaching. And so you had these other pieces that not everybody at the $800,000 level do.
Yeah.
Most of the people at the $800,000 level, they've got people on their org chart or their accountability chart, whatever they want to call it. And everybody reports into them. So it's very, they're talking to everybody every day, every week. And it's a lot of communication, which is great to see that you can put a structure in place. So you did that really, really well.
Well, thank you.
Now you were going to say something.
I was just saying, what you brought up a thought for me. One of the things I'm most excited about of hiring a real operations manager and a real chief operating officer is we have a call every Monday and Wednesday at 2:30 where we have my virtual assistant who does a lot of the marketing. We have my personal assistant that does a lot of the onboarding. We have our Facebook ads gal who's a part-time contractor. She's amazing. Shout out to Bree. We have all of them on a meeting with Ashley and Bob, our now part-time operations manager and COO. And like, I don't have to attend those meetings. They I got back like 2 hours of my life because they're actually running the meetings and being like, hey, what's the report? What's the KPI? Where are we growing here? And I'm like, wait, KPIs? I've been reading about this stuff for 20 years. I never had any. And I was like, this is amazing. So just getting my time back has been something that's been well worth the money. So what can you tell the audience, what does a COO do? What does a operations manager do? And maybe I'll have Chris link to, I think this is a mutual friend of yours too, Chandler Bolt, who's in the author self-publishing school world. He runs a very successful Fortune 5,000, Fortune 1,000 business. He's growing extremely fast. Great guy. Chandler Bolt has a whole business helping people write books. And he has this great video on YouTube, which we'll link to, about like how to go from having like an executive assistant, to an operations manager to a COO. So could you maybe talk through that evolution as a business is growing? Like, what does an executive assistant do versus what does an operations manager do versus what does a COO do? And when do we need to start looking at bringing those people in either fractionally or maybe one day full time? Can you talk through that kind of evolution of a business growth?
I absolutely can. And maybe what I'll do with Chris as well is I'll send him over. I've got a video on my YouTube channel that talks to the difference between a COO and an operations manager, a directors of operations, to try and increase the understanding of what the differences are.
Awesome. We'll make sure we link to that for sure, because that's going to be, I think, one of the big questions of people like, well, why do you need a COO? What's an ops manager or whatnot? So give us the Reader's Digest version on that, and that will definitely be a clip that we put together with your video.
That'd be awesome, because that is a question we get a lot. I don't really understand, what does a COO or an integrator, that's the other word, what do they do? And so when you're looking at 250,000, and actually I see it a lot when people hit the $150,000 mark, they bring on an EA. They whatever term you call it, a personal assistant, an executive assistant, a scheduler, it's those, oh, can you keep reminding me that I have to do this? Can you make sure that you coordinate an appointment with this person over here? Can you just manage my to-do list? Tell me what I have to do every day with those little things that I don't want to forget because they're critical, but I can't really keep them top of mind for myself at all times. That's when you're going from smaller $125,000, and I've seen them go all the way up to the $500,000 mark, where that can be the only person on their team except for the marketer.
Right.
That's usually another important hire. And then when you're moving over to an operations manager or a business manager, different titles, of course, anywhere from the $300,000 mark up to the $700,000 mark, somewhere in there, you bring on your operations manager.
Now you're talking revenue, right? Like 300,000 to 700,000 in revenue.
Annual revenue, exactly.
Which, depending on the business, could be $30,000 in profit or $290,000 in profit on that, $300,000 in revenue, right? Really, really can change based on the industry, overhead, things of that nature.
Exactly. Somebody who's bricks and mortar would have a very different business structure than somebody who's a coaching business, for example.
Right.
So super, super different. When you're doing the operations manager or the business manager, they're coordinating with the different team members. I'm going to talk to your bookkeeper and make sure that the reconciliations were done. I'm going to talk to the scheduler and make sure that the podcast was set up. They're making sure that all of those levers happen and that everybody who's a vendor for you, because usually when you're smaller, you have lots of people who do things for you in different ways, but they're not on your team. They're the third-party vendor. So I'm going to coordinate with all the third-party vendors as an example and make sure that they're held accountable to meet the timelines and deadlines and costs that they had committed to in whatever the project was.
Yeah.
But when you're moving into the $1 million, even to $10 million range. And actually, Bob has gone even further than that as a fractional COO. But again, it goes to the business structure.
Right.
You really need somebody who can sit down, and on the small side of it, you want a minimum of a half day a week at that point in time, because ultimately you need those strategic conversations. They're going to need them with you, the one-on-ones that go, here's the vision in my head as the CEO and the founder. Now I need to translate that through the COO or the integrator into making it come to fruition through the rest of the team. And that's the COO's magic power, if you will.
Yeah.
That ability to make strategic decisions, that ability to work with you to say, I've been here, I've done it before. I've seen this work best in your industry. What do you think about this? And then take it and make it happen with the team.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me give a real world example of this. And then I want to pick your brain about visionary versus integrator. I just wrote that down. Here's how Scott Grove's pre-COO and operations manager would work. There would be something top of mind in the market, right? And I would say, oh, let's do a free 30-minute webinar on this for loan officers. We'll give them 29 minutes of value and then 1 minute of, hey, this is why you should sign up for coaching. And it would be kind of slapstick, and I'd be yelling at Chris to set up the Zoom thing, and we would do this. And then, through like just sheer force of will, some Facebook connections, some friends and friends, we'd get 40 coaching members and 40 non-coaching members to jump on that webinar. I wouldn't really sell from the webinar. I'd do a shitty job. I'd have no post-webinar follow-up, and maybe 1 or 2 people would sign up because they're like, man, I really like this Scott guy. He gave us a lot of free information. I want more of that. Let me sign up for coaching. That's Scott 1.0. Well, now Scott 2.0 with, an operations manager and a COO, they're like, okay, so what we're going to have is we're going to have an Asana board so that when Scott says go, we have to have a webinar next Thursday. Everybody knows their plan. Bree puts up some Facebook ads. All of the advertisements get posted in these Facebook groups. We email this 5,000 loan officer email list that Scott has in Kajabi that he never used before. We actually email them to tell them about the webinar. We have a sequence of 5 emails that go out post-webinar to send it out to people and try to get people to sign up for the coaching. Bob's going to give me some coaching on how to sell within the webinar, right? And so this one that we just pulled off a week ago, we had, 400 and something registrants. So we, 5x'd the size of our webinar. 200 people showed up live. 13 people signed up for coaching post webinar. We got a lot of goodwill out there, and we got, probably from rebroadcasting it in several mortgage Facebook groups, we got a couple thousand eyeballs on the webinar. And it's just like this, this positive self-fulfilling prophecy where it's like, if you build it, they will come, right? So it's like, I would always just kind of put stuff out there slapstick, and the people that saw it, great, they would appreciate it. They knew I was kind of an intellectual philanthropist, but now we have like a business built around that intellectual philanthropy where it's like, well, if Scott's going to give a rock star free 1 hour, webinar with tons of value for these loan officers, then we've got to have a systematic approach to getting some of them to sign up for coaching. And that's the difference between, my price point's around $300, $400 a month. So if I would get in the old model, 1 person to sign up, that's the average person stays in about 2 years. So 300 times 24, what is that? That's like $7,200. Now we've got 13 people times, $6,000, let's say, now we generated $80,000 off that webinar. And people talk to me about how expensive this is to hire these people. And I'm like, no, when somebody pays for themselves, it doesn't, and they're producing a positive return on investment. It doesn't matter how much they cost. As long as they're generating 2x, 3x, 5x the revenue, who cares what they charge? Like, I hope we get to a point where they cost me $100,000 a month, because that means I'm making $500,000 more per month. So, that maybe you can just keep that as a testimonial for your company, but what's going right there? And like, are we hitting that sweet spot of what these people are supposed to do?
And I just want to point out some of the key things that you just said so that your listeners can tune back into that. You talked about the fact that there is a tool and a process for recording and systematizing exactly what you did. So although you did it one time, your back end now knows exactly what you need. So you come up Monday morning and you go, oh my God, I had the best aha moment for value driven that I want to provide. Hey, Bob, I want to do this and I want to do it on Friday. They've already got the assets, the system, the tools, the workflows. They just need to duplicate it all now to go to the next one. So yeah, you're absolutely right. What you come in and it takes a while to do the first time, and you got to tweak it. And sometimes you have to do some trial and error, and that's okay. And then you go forth and look at that. Right. Now you've got a system in place. You drop those aha moments. I mean, a typical visionary comment. I love it. Yeah. Because you're the idea guy. You're the guy that sees everything in terms of where your industry is going. You have a vision in your mind for exactly what you want your company to do. How do I want to impact positively in the world around me? I have an aha moment. I'm going to do this. Right. And now you have the systems, the people, and the processes in place to make it happen. and generate the revenue.
I'm going to give you a quote that you're going to love. And it's one of my favorite quotes that I just never live by because I'm like the visionary guy. I need the integrator to do the process stuff. My buddy Hal Elrod, who wrote the book, The Miracle Morning, he says one of his quotes is, every success was preceded by a process. Like every success that we ever have in life is preceded by a process. You know, if you've lost weight, it's because you set up a process, you put your gym clothes, next to the bed, so you stumbled over them and you had to go to the gym, you cleaned out the refrigerator, you put your healthy food on auto delivery, whatever you did. Like to lose weight, there was a process, right? To have business success, there was a process. To commit to making the daily connection calls of lead generation and building relationships, there's a process, right? I have my calendar reminder, then I have my time blocked out, then I have my call sheet, then I have myself. Like there's a process for everything that creates success. But as founders or visionaries or business owners or whatever you want to call it, like we suck at implementing the processes. It's really a dilemma. So maybe this is where you describe to us and I think this comes from the book, Rocket Fuel Rocket Fuel, the visionary versus the integrator. Can you explain who's the visionary, who's the integrator, and why this creates a dynamic where Susan's business exists?
And visionaries, they're amazing people. They're the entrepreneurs of the world. You're absolutely right, Scott. This does come from Rocket Fuel. It comes from the basis of the EOS model, an entrepreneurial operating system. Great system. We talk about I say we. I'm putting myself in the COO seat. I know I sit as a founder of my own company, but I am a COO at heart. I don't like to be out front. I like to just get the stuff done for my clients.
Right.
Right. Ultimately, the visionary is that big idea person and the one that's going to drop a new idea about every 10 minutes. Mm. And Scott, can I tell you that 90% of them will be crap?
Yes. We have a whole parking lot of notes that are probably crap that never come back into my head again, where like Annie will tell me sometimes, she's like, hey, I got a bunch of stuff to follow up with you on. I'm like, all right, cool, go for it. And she's like, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I'm like, yeah, all of those suck. Just don't worry about it. We'll get to those at some later date. Like we have no time or energy to implement those or do those projects. She's like, okay. And I'm like, but just keep writing them down because eventually there's going to be a golden nugget in there that we are going to work on. But yeah, all that stuff I gave you, that's crap. Just don't worry about it. So you're right. 90% of the visionary ideas are crap.
And without that operations manager and COO in between you and the team is running in every direction because they heard the last idea and they're trying to execute it for you.
Right.
And they're like, oh, what do you mean you switched the idea 5 minutes ago? I didn't know that. I was still working on that.
Right.
And like, oh no. So the integrator, a good integrator will come in and first it's all about the fit. And you and I talked about this when you met Bob. It is all about making sure you have a good visionary integrator fit, right? If you have the wrong integrator, the wrong COO, the wrong second in command, it's never going to work. You've got to have that click, that personality, that connection, because you're going to drop a bunch of things to them. You're going to have conversations with them that'll touch on a variety of topics. And if you don't feel you can be transparent and there's trust there, it's not going to work. The integrator will then take those ideas and they might have a pile that says the long-term parking lot.
Yes, long-term parking lot. A lot of cars die in the long-term parking lot. They just rust out. The tires are flattened. There were shit ideas. It was like a Yugo to begin with, and then it just rotted in the parking lot.
Yes. And then we have the medium parking lot, the things that you need to do, but you don't need to do today.
Right.
Right. But the COO or the integrator will talk to you about that, understand the business priorities, because they're going to have made you go through quarterly planning, right? We're at the end of September as we record this. Quarterly planning, if I cannot say it long enough. I have a different client, and they every quarter, well, I know we have this time, but can I just shorten it by half?
Right,
no.
Right.
No, I'm going to insist that we stick to the full time because I already cut the full time down when we did your calendar year.
Right.
And it's already too short. So no. And you have to be able to understand with the visionary integrator model that point of communication, you're going to get some no's. I know you're not going to like it as founders, but sometimes you need it in your business. And you need to be that intermediary spot.
I know for us in Q4, we have our whole focus in Q4 is mastering our live events. So we have a small group live event for my inner circle. They're coming out to Scottsdale, Arizona. There are about 25 of us. You know, how do we make this the most impactful, financially viable, whatnot? Then we've got a online live event that's going to be open to hundreds of people. How do we drive the most traffic to that? And then I'm doing an in-person for the mortgage company I work for, Synergy One. We're doing about a 200 person like sales rally for 2 days. So it's like, we've got these 3 key live events. And every time I bring a new project, Bob's like, hey, just remember, you know, you still got your mortgage business that you're doing a lot in. If we start backing up, if we start backing up too many projects on top of the live events, we're going to stress test the system and we're going to blow it up. So let's just, between now and the end of the year, really dial in what's our task list for a live event, because, you know, the vision's curse is like, all right, guys, we're doing a live event on November 9th and 10th. Make it happen. I can come up with a great workbook and I know how to deliver a great live product. But they're like, okay, great. Well, what are we going to do for audio visual? I don't know. Figure it out. They're like, well, where are we going to get the workbooks and the lanyards and the name tags and everything printed? I don't know. Figure it out. It's like, didn't we use somebody last time? They're like, yeah, but we don't have that written down anywhere. Who did we use last time? I'm like, I think Minuteman Press. Call them, I guess, maybe, sort of. And it's just like, it's this endless checklist of like, there's so much that goes into a live event with guest speakers and like, I don't know, does corporate pay for this guy's flight, or do I use my frequent flyer miles? Like, are we buying the books at retail for the speaker? Or are we buying them in bulk at the author's price and then we're paying them to show up? Like, there's a million details that go into a live event. And all I care is I just want to get on stage and add value to the people in the crowd. I don't give a shit about all of that other, like, check the box items, but apparently it has to get done.
It really does. I had the pleasure, you talk about live events, which has its own level of unique details that come up with it. Another operations manager on my team and I back in the day were working together with a client, and they put on live events. They were 1,000-person events. It was at one time a year.
1,000 people. That's insane.
Yes. And it was, hey, we got to systematize this because we know it's going to be, you know, we were there at the first one. And so you do the planning for the first one so that you know when the next year comes up, okay, I needed 4 months to do that and 3 months to do this. It was awards, it was value, it was speakers coming in, it was hotel logistics. And you're like, wow, that was quite the Asana board.
Yeah, there you go. I like the Asana tools.
I know, because at 3:00 in the morning, if you have that aha moment, you can drop it in Asana for the conversation that happens the next day. Then you know it's not going to be forgotten.
Yeah. You know, and it's some crazy stuff. Like one of the small decisions we had to make, which ended up being a huge decision, is for this live 200-person event we're doing in Vegas for the Synergy One group. You know, one of the big conversations was, okay, we're going to pay for the hotel room and we're going to pay for this large event, but we're also trying to be cost conscious. You know, who do we commit to travel, right? Because, oh my God, booking travel for 200 unique people is just a nightmare. Like, if you don't have an infrastructure and a website, and one of the things I talked about with Bob was like, hey man, we're just coming out of COVID. Most of the people that are going to come to this event are on the West Coast, so they can get a round trip on Southwest Airlines for $250. And or because of COVID, everybody's got a travel voucher buried somewhere in their email for a flight they had to cancel. Just put the travel on the loan officers, and you know, you probably save the company $70,000 plus. The loan officer doesn't care. Like, if they're not going to spend $200 to come to an event that's hosted by the company, then you probably didn't want them there to begin with. And it was like, it just eliminated this huge level of cost, complexity. And we haven't had one single loan officer come back and be like, oh man, I can't make it because I can't afford the travel. And it's like, oh man, what a giant headache. So that's going in the Asana board for the rest of time. Like, hey, you get yourself there, you pay for the travel. We're never booking that shit again. And we're going to put on a world-class event and cater the food and pay for your hotel room. And we're going to make it awesome. Just get yourself there. Which makes sense, right? I mean, you're dropping $100,000 on a live event. The loan officer can spend $500 to get themselves there and home. And then they book their own travel. It eliminates all the headache, eliminates staffing needs. It's just like, just a little tweak that makes a big difference, where the founder would have just been like, I don't know, put it on my executive assistant. Now she's got to book travel for 200 people and she's pulling her hair out and wants to, you know, commit Harry Carey. So stuff like this matters, apparently.
Strategic conversations, systems, and processes. Accountability. Are you sure you wanted that 38% profit margin, Scott, or did you want to actually pay for everybody's travel?
Yeah. Did you want to lose money on this event? Totally.
Exactly.
And these are conversations in the heat of the moment. I think business owners can relate to this. In my 20s, I felt like I got $100 to death, right? I was like always going to the ATM to pull out $100 for something. And then in my 30s, I was like, oh, dude, I'm getting like $500 to death. The copay for the hot water heater replacement, or the gardener's got to reseed the lawn, or, I forgot that there was a car warranty extension I wanted to pay for my sister. There's like, in your 30s, you get $500 to death. And then when you own a business that's scaling to $1 million, you can easily get $5,000 to death, where you're like, oh, I totally forgot we were going to do this new system with this new thing, and now we got to drop $5,000 worth of Facebook ads. And I'm like, oh, that sucks. And then all of a sudden, if you don't have a COO or an operations manager, helping you with the books, you can easily turn yourself into a very, unprofitable company overnight.
You can. You really can. You just take a look at your example of the event, right? You're in person. Somebody comes up to one of your team members. One of your team members doesn't have a system or process in place. You're on stage and they say, hey, would you like us to bring in tea and coffee for the back of the room, which wasn't originally on the plan? I mean, my gosh, that can start adding up, because it's a per head fee for the tea, the coffee, the food, whatever it winds up being. Sure. $5,000, please.
Yes.
Right.
So Chris has a great example of this, the tea and water. And we were at, I'm going to call him out by name because it really bothered me. It was the Arizona Grand in Scottsdale, Arizona. And Chris, maybe you can remind us, what did we pay for extra iced tea? Because they basically, without asking us, just kept bringing gallons of iced tea, and everybody in the mortgage industry loves iced tea, because we can't drink beer till 5:01. What did we pay for extra iced tea?
Well, first of all, it has to be acknowledged that the iced tea was $650 per gallon.
$650 per gallon of iced tea that was brought into the reception area without us asking for it.
And I think they tried to add $3,000 to our bill for it.
Yeah, they added 5 gallons of iced tea that they brought in because they're like, hey, do you want to refill the iced tea? And we're like, well, yeah, it's water and tea, so I imagine it's just complimentary. Nope, $650 per gallon. And so when I got the final bill, instead of breaking even and doing the right thing for our coaching clients, which I really don't expect to make money off our live events, it's kind of a break even or a small loss leader to get people to sign up for coaching. Instead of us breaking even, we were negative $5,000 or $6,000 because of all the stuff they snuck in on the food and beverage bill. And I mean, this stuff can just eat you alive as a business owner.
It can. And you need somebody to look at it. Most founders and CEOs, they hate the numbers. I don't want to look at the KPIs, the dashboards, the numbers. Those are just numbers. I want to go deliver value and do these big things.
Right. Can you explain for the person that's watching what a KPI is, why they're important, and maybe for my business, for example, give me some key KPIs that you would guess Bob has us, monitoring. So talk a little bit for those that have never heard that acronym before. What's a KPI and why does it matter to our business?
Everybody's business works on metrics, numbers. And so a KPI, it's an acronym. It stands for Key Performance Indicator, just a fancy term that means that every week we look at certain numbers. We want them to be leading numbers where possible. So I'm just going to say leading versus lagging is an important detail. What on earth does that mean? Well, that means you don't want to always be looking at your lagging indicators, the things that have already taken place, like your finances, right? Last month, we did X number of sales. Great. But that was last month. That won't tell you if you're on track for this upcoming week or upcoming year or anything like that. So I'm guessing you're looking more at your leading indicators when you are talking to Bob. For the most part, you've got to have some lagging indicators in there.
Yeah.
And a leading indicator is predictive. So if you have a funnel and the top of your funnel looks up here and it says, hey, I want to know how many people from my ads go into my page, how many people from my page buy the product. That's the self-liquidating offer probably. Then from that, you want to go through to how many sign up for the email, how many actually get on a call with me, how many book, how many show up, and how many do I close, right? If you see the top of the funnel and the rest of the statistics that you already know go from one piece to the next all the way down, you can predict what's going to come out the other end.
Totally.
So I'm guessing you do things like looking at return on ad spend. You probably look at how many people have purchased in the week. How many people have looked at your ad in the week? How many people have bought? Because you got to know your sales numbers, right? I would guess you're looking at retention figures. You're looking at churn because you're running a coaching business, right?
Yep.
And so people come and people go, and you need to make sure you understand what's going on with that dynamic. Am I kind of close with that?
Yeah, you're real close. And the only caveat, which is weird about our business, is Bob could not believe my numbers for two reasons. One, if I get somebody on a call, the close rate is basically 100% because they've made up their mind at that point that they're going to join coaching. They've seen enough of my stuff for free on Facebook. They got a strong referral from a friend. So he's like, wait a minute. If you get them to book a call, you're closing like, let's not say 100, 90%, 9 out of 10 people, one gets cold feet or they're trying to just get it for free or whatever. I'm like, yeah, no, the closing ratio is that high. I'm like, the problem is I'm only booking like 1 to 2 appointments a week. And he's like, okay, so I can't believe you're at that number, but that's great. What about on the other side, like the top of the funnel? I'm like, I have no clue. So basically in working together, what we've identified is that there's this sweet spot of combination between the size of our email list and the size of the people I have influence with in mortgage Facebook groups. And so I'm giving out little free information in these mortgage, Facebook groups. And then they're also seeing me via email. And then one day they just decide, oh, I need a coach. That coach is going to be Scott. Let me schedule a call. And that's why we have like a 90% close rate. So now a bunch of our KPIs is LinkedIn, Facebook people that are following our business page, Facebook people that I have influence in either in my mortgage consolidated coaching Facebook group or other mortgage centric Facebook groups. Like how many people do I have influence in or I can get eyeballs on in social media? So it's like, all right, we grew the Facebook group from 4,580 to 4,820. We want to see like a 5 to 10% growth in that Facebook group until we get to 100,000 combined loan officers in our email list, plus Facebook, plus LinkedIn, whatnot, because then we know at the top of the funnel, we'll have 100 coaching or 500 coaching clients instead of 130 coaching clients, and then the sky's the limit. And so we've kind of Bob's helped me reverse engineer where do you have influence and where are your clients actually coming from? Because if you have 100% close rate, we just got to get that, 2 appointments a week up to 5 appointments a week, and you double your revenue. So that's been really cool to see the KPIs of like, where do we need to grow in influence and followers and interactions? So then that turns into appointments, which still close at like 90% if they know who I am. So it's pretty cool. It's like a real business.
Imagine that.
Imagine. Go figure.
For everyone who's listening, it's really important that for your business, you take the time to look at the customer journey. So I did this. I tapped Bob on the shoulder as one of 2 other COOs that I brought in. And I do want to point out that Bob's great for your business because of his experience, his expertise. But we have other COOs on our roster that have different bets to them. So one of them, for example, is a CPA. So I brought in that one and I brought in Bob. They were both kind enough to give me some time in July, and we mapped out the customer journey for my team. And so I said, I really want you to just have that conversation and tell me I'm wrong. I'm going to put on the founder seat and take out the COO hat. And you can tell me where I'm making all my mistakes. That's okay. But it was exactly that. You're like, okay, well, I know that for this step of the journey, so the top of the funnel, if there's 100 people coming in here, I know that we have a conversion rate of 28 to 32%. That's on average over the course of the last year. My background, I'm actually a scientist and an epidemiologist, so I tend to look a little longer at my numbers just because it's how I like it. So Not everybody does it. Some people use averages of 7 to 20 days, and that's great. That will work too, as long as you're not using something that's too short, like 1 day. 1 day's worth of Facebook ads will do nothing for you. Don't do that. So when you're looking at some of this stuff, we went and we said, okay, well, our top of the funnel is actually not bad. We've got a return on ad spend when we do our stuff from our Facebook ads into our funnel, which is our self-liquidating offer for our tools and templates. They're my favorites that I put together as a bundle. Cracks me up when I hear people and they're like, oh, this didn't work. Like I literally gave you for free the tool that I used with my very first client that saved them 40,000 recurring revenue a month. You mean you didn't implement it? That's what you're telling me.
Yes. Can we stop on this? Something not working doesn't work for 2 reasons. Either the tool itself doesn't work, or you didn't swing the effing hammer, right? So it's like, yeah, okay, either you had a hammer and you really needed a screwdriver, or you had a hammer and it just sat there on the table and you never actually swung it, right? Because I get the same thing in our coaching business. They're like, Scott, I really love you. The personality is great. The information you're giving me is great, but the coaching is just not really working for me. And I'm like, oh, okay, let me dig in deeper because I want to know what we could do better. Have you been coming to the daily calls? Well, no, I have kind of a scheduling conflict. Okay, well, have you watched the replay of the calls in our Facebook group? Well, I don't want to go on Facebook because then I get sucked into like 2 hours of like pettiness and arguing about politics. I'm like, okay, well, are you making the daily calls? Well, no, I really, I just can't find the motivation to make the calls. I'm like, okay, so it's not that the coaching's not working. You just haven't implemented shit. And that's okay. I'm not offended. Like, we're all different seasons of our life. Sometimes we're lazy. Sometimes we're in growth mode. But it's not that the coaching didn't work. They're like, yeah, that's true. I'm still going to cancel, or, hey, let me recommit for 60 days to actually doing the stuff and seeing it works. And not surprisingly, the people that recommit and actually do the stuff, it works. Go figure, right? Anyway, I digress.
Go figure.
I just want to get that.
Oh, no, I hear you all the time. I am just dumbfounded. Oh, so you didn't do the thing that you knew you had to do to get the results, and now you're upset.
Yeah. I never complain at anybody else ever, except for my wife, for the fact that I'm fat, because I know what I need to do. I need to eat less like unhealthy foods, and I need to move my body more. Those are 100% up to me. Now, I can tangentially complain at my wife a little bit when she brings like not so healthy food into the house, and I'm like, honey, I have no self-control. You cannot have a bag of Doritos in the pantry, because if it's Friday night and I'm catching up on like, House of Dragons or something, I'm going to eat the whole damn bag of Doritos. So please, honey, I know myself. I know how I get fat. Please just don't have that stuff in the house. Hide it in your trunk for when you need, because my wife has amazing self-control. It drives me bonkers. She can have like 3 chips and then put the bag away for 2 days. And I'm like, how do you do that? I have to eat the whole bag of chips. Anyway, so she's the only person I complain at. But I know what to do. That's why I never complain about it to anybody, that I'm like carrying around an extra 15 pounds of weight, because like I know what I have to do to get rid of it. I just choose not to do it. So I despise when people complain about their lot in life and they know what to do. Like, if you don't know what to do, if you don't have that opportunity, I'm with you, dude. I want to get you the opportunity. But if you know what to do, just quit bitching about the fact that you have not done it. Come on.
Yes. Goes back to the generational thing. If I can take another side step over there.
Sure.
I watched a YouTube video. Jason Dorsey was the guy's name, the Gen Y guy he was referred to once upon a time. I always laugh so hard when I watch this one particular link to the video, because he has a piece in there, and I know I'm a Gen Xer, so I get it. I'm a little bit older. But he talked about millennials and how you have to communicate with them, and you have to break it down step by step in reverse order. And I was like, what? I couldn't understand it. But literally, the way their mind works, because of the school system and all sorts of other things, it's very hard for them to understand if they don't understand the outcome first.
Interesting.
If millennials don't understand the outcome first. So think about this when you're coaching your team. If I'm coaching a team of millennials, I want to paint the big picture. I want to tell them what I'm going to tell them, then tell them what I told them. Great. But I have to do it in reverse order. So all of my steps, I can't start at step 1. I have to start at step 5 and reverse it backwards.
Interesting. Chris, can you look up the birth years on millennials? Because I want to make sure before I pick on them, I'm getting the age bracket right. But this kind of reminds me of Tom's Shoes, right? So Tom's Shoes started out with the big idea first. We're going to save the world and put shoes on poor people's feet. And then they're like, okay, how do we reverse engineer that into a business? Well, we'll sell shoes that have a high enough profit margin that every pair that you sell, you get to give a free pair to an underprivileged, poor family in a country or whatever. So I'm guessing for like those millennials, which Chris will look up the age bracket on that.
A millennial is generally 81 to 96.
81 to 96. So they're in the 40. Yeah, I'm just pre-millennial in 79, but I'm not quite an Xer.
I'm an old millennial.
You're an old millennial. So it's like the 25 to 40-year-olds right now, somewhere in there. They've got to start with, hey, you're going to work here at Tom's, And by working at Tom's, we're saving the world one pair of shoes at a time. And now let me back that all the way down to, that means you have to go get coffee for the CEO if you're like a new executive assistant, right? But you got to start with the big picture. You got to start with the end result. Like, we're saving the world by keeping the visionary happy. The visionary's happy when he has coffee by 8 o'clock. So now you have to go get the coffee. That's part of your job description as an executive assistant. Versus if you just tell a millennial, hey, okay, every day at 8:05, there's a, grande latte on the CEO's desk. They'll be like, well, that's stupid. But you got to start with the end first when you're talking to these people.
You do. But if you're talking to a boomer, right? If you're talking to Bob and you say, hey, Bob, I just need you to get coffee every day at 8:05. He'll go, okay.
Yeah.
Because that's part of his job.
It's part of the checklist, right? It's like you just do the checklist.
Yes. You do the checklist. You come here, because it's okay that you got this grand vision. That's great. That's why I wanted to be with the company. But you don't have to tell me the grand vision every time that you're asking me to do something new to show me how it fits into the picture. It's not how it works.
Interesting. So, I feel like millennials, Gen Zers, Gen Yers, they get this bad rap of like, being lazy or, maybe just being the visionary and not having the hustle and the follow through to work hard to make it happen. But, let's classifying any group or community of people, by generation or by race or by sexual preference or by male versus female. It's like, you're going to have some crazy outliers on both sides, right? So I know some baby boomers that have not yet left their mom's basement. And I know some Gen Yers that are building multi-million-dollar businesses, and they'll work 90 hours a week to do it. So, I really hate when people latch onto that, millennials are so lazy, or Gen Xers or Gen Yers or Gen Zers or this. But I think it does go to, they grew up in a different time. They grew up in a different set of financial circumstances. Like, I can't imagine getting out of college and getting your first job right after, 9/11, and then you go through like a mortgage crash, right? And then you go through you've just been through like major economic turmoil at every stage of your adult/professional career. So before we move on, because I want to hear some more about your journey and your company specifically, any tips on, let's say you're over 40, working with people under 40. So you're somewhere between X and baby boomer, and you didn't grow up with a cell phone. And now you're working with people who are, their whole identity is online. It's Facebook, it's Twitch, it's Instagram. It's their online persona is more important in many cases than their like in-person persona. So if I'm Chris Lockheed, a friend of mine, has a great talk on this about, I'm an analog human being. So I live in the analog world, all this crazy real stuff around me. And then the digital is kind of a secondary avatar of Scott Groves, or maybe even a distraction, where you get people under 40, their digital self, that's their real self, their online avatar, their personality, they're, living in virtual reality now in the metaverse. That's the real person. And this analog stuff out here, the real world, the getting the coffee, that's a distraction, or that's their secondary personality or avatar. So if we're just talking about that one divide, maybe people under 40 managing or working for or working with people under 40, give us kind of like your best COO tips.
I'm going to go at it, and I'm going to say there's really only one that you need to know. Now, we do this. So every month with my team, we come together as operators, and we do knowledge transfer sessions internally. It's one of the best parts about being part of a fractional team. And you come together as a team because you can go, listen, this is what I'm seeing. These are the trends I'm seeing. I like to talk about this. And consistently, there's only one thing across all the generations, all the clients, that you need to remember. Seek to understand first, right? So I had a conversation at one point with my brother, who's a boomer, and he is retired. And so he's not in the workforce anymore. He was a senior manager at a multinational corporation back in the day. And I said, I actually had to have 4 months of conversations about pronouns. And he looked at me with this look on his face. And I said, I know, because you don't understand. I get it. You're not there, right? You're off doing your own thing. You're playing your golf. You're doing your sailing. You're doing whatever. But it's a big thing when you're talking to millennials and you're talking to other generations. And so as an Xer, I kind of straddle both lanes, and I want to make sure I seek to understand, because I want to play the telephone hub. I want to make sure that everybody is going to learn how to communicate with everybody else. And no matter what the issue is, I seek to understand first is a great approach. So if people could do that a little bit more and understand where the other person's coming from and why they're bringing it up, understanding that why makes all the difference in the world when you want to respond to it, especially as a business
All right.
owner.
So we're gonna ask for some more free coaching here, and you pulled the strings of one of my favorite political hot buttons.
Oh no!
When does seeking to understand come into conflict with, like, hey, the owner or the CEO or the boss is going to make a decision when those are at odds? So, for example, I get it. I understand the thought of putting pronouns in your signature line and on your Zoom stuff because maybe you feel like you're being more inclusive to the person that's, changed their sexuality or confused about their sexuality or whatever. I get it. And if anybody on my team started doing that stuff, they would no longer be on the team because I think it's just like a peacocking political distraction, and I don't want any of that in my business. If I want to argue about politics, I'll go straight to Facebook. I'll find somebody to argue with about politics, but I don't want any of that garbage in either my mortgage business or my coaching business. And I really do feel in my heart of hearts, as let's just say the CEO of my business, I do feel like the pronoun stuff in your bio and whatnot, it's just a political peacocking, I'm on your team, and I think it causes a distraction to the business. That's my opinion. So if I had somebody on my team that was like, I sought to understood, I talked to them about their concerns, I understand why they want to do it, and on this issue, I'm just going to say no. How do you square?
And that's okay, by the way.
Can you repeat that?
CEO,
Can you repeat that?
You're right.
Can you repeat that for the people in the back?
Seek to understand what they're saying, seek to understand in terms of understanding your obligations under the law, right? You don't want to be going and putting yourself into a position, whether it's pronouns or whatever the issue is, right? That you're against legal issues with wherever your jurisdiction is.
Right.
But then you've got to make a decision and just stick to it. And it doesn't mean you have to stick to it forever. This is the decision today.
Right.
EOS has a great model. They call it IDS, identify, discuss, and solve. And I love it because identify comes down to getting your issue into a short sentence. What's the actual issue, right? If you've got to ask a few whys to make sure you're not talking about the symptom and you're talking about the root cause, do it. Make sure you understand why. Seek to understand. But then when you're discussing the different viewpoints and the different, I need to know this, what are my obligations on that? When you start repeating yourself, you're done. Because that's just politicking. You've got no more new things coming out. Now you just need to solve it and make a decision.
Right.
IDS.
Right. Yeah. And by the way, I have respect for founders or CEOs on both sides of this, where it's like, Disney has made a hard left and they've gone all in on the inclusivity and the pronouns and all that stuff. And it's like, that's their business decision. I can choose or choose not to continue to support Disney products. And then I think, I could be wrong on this, maybe Chris can fact check this for me, the founder of crypto.com, the online, wallet and trading, it's the biggest crypto trading in the world. He made a hard right, for lack of a better term. And he's like, hey, there will be no political discussion on our Slack boards. This is a place of profession. Like, I appreciate that you might have your, social justice or political views or whatever. That's for outside. By all means, use the money that you earn as an employee to go invest wherever you want to. There will be no pronouns in the bios. There will be no this. Like, this is a place of business for a financial institution, and we're going to run it as such, And it's like, cool. I can choose either to support crypto.com or not crypto.com, depending on my personal and political beliefs. I don't fault a founder or a CEO who has to make that decision, but I'm guessing the ones that get stuck in the middle and they don't make the decision and then they're kind of held hostage by different factions of their employees, I have to imagine those are the businesses that suffer.
Yes. And why don't they make the decision? Right? Why are those people holding off? Are they trying to be the quiet middle? Sometimes as a founder and a CEO, you've just got to make a call. And whether it's right or wrong, you're going to make a call. Tomorrow, you may change your mind as a visionary. Right, that happens, right? New information could come to light. Changes could happen. That's cool. And then you make a different call. But it ultimately comes down to understanding the gamut of your choices, right? Do you only have one choice, two choices, three choices? You've always got to have two or three choices available to you. And yes, sometimes you need to explain to people why you're making the decision that you are as a CEO. But it's also a matter of, now that I, as the leader, have made that decision, you need to rally behind me.
Yeah. Yeah. We got to have that Braveheart moment.
If you choose that you aren't in alignment, that's okay too, right?
Yeah.
Core values, talk to another conversation, right? About team and making sure that you're hiring and firing and making all those decisions on your core values. It's important to have. And if there's not alignment, that's okay.
Yeah.
And as CEOs, we need to remember, it's okay if the people are not going to stay with us forever.
Totally. And that's why you need the Asana board, right? That's why you need the Asana board and the process and the system, so that when you do have to replace an employee, whether they're an entry-level employee or a key, right-hand man employee, you've got everything set up for that new person to succeed, which I did not have prior to having, Ashley and Bob. So kudos to your company for that. I want to, sorry, go ahead. Finish that thought and then we'll shift gears a little bit, if you've got time.
Yeah, I've got time. So I spent 20 years in the pharmaceutical industry. Now, I spent 20 years in the pharmaceutical industry in the animal side of things, not the human side of things. So my jokes were always funnier, especially since we were on the reproductive side. So, you could walk in and you could have a lot of fun. And I came into work one day, and after the 20 years, I called myself a lifer. I said, okay, I'm here forever. I absolutely love the culture here. I love the business. I walked into my office. They gave me this big, beautiful plaque, and the plaque talked about how wonderful my contributions had been. And then they gave me a pink slip. Mismanagement at the top meant that I was out of a job with 43 of my fellow friends. We all walked out of the building that day. And so we kind of joke about it around here with fractional operations people, is that we come into a business looking for the pink slip, because we've done our job well. You've grown, you've scaled, you no longer need us. Now you maybe need that full-time person, and we're happy to help make that happen too.
Yeah, that's amazing. Because, shifting gears to your business specifically, and I don't mind sharing what I pay for my fractional COO and my fractional operations manager. I pay $10,000 total. I don't know how that gets broke down on your side. Feel free to share or not share. But my understanding is I basically get Ashley and Bob for about 12 to 15 hours each, somewhere in there, to run meetings or do whatever we decide to do. Sometimes it's a little bit less, sometimes it's a little bit more, whatever the case may be. Sometimes it's a lot less, sometimes it's a lot more. But talking about your business specifically, I don't think you're shy about your price point either. Can you tell people kind of in my bucket what I get and what I'm paying for? And then if you have a bucket above me or a bucket below me, can you just talk a little bit about your business model and how that came to be?
Yeah. And I'm actually going to start back a little bit on how the business model came to be, if I could, because it's been a bit of an evolution. So when I walked out of that wonderful pharmaceutical job, I said to myself, well, what am I going to be when I grow up? So I decided to be a solopreneur. I hung up my shingle. I played in that field for a while. That was great. But I realized with the pandemic that ultimately, hit by bus theory, I get hit by a bus. I'm a single mom. What happens to my daughter? Right? That's not a very scalable thing. In succession planning, I would coach my own clients to do other things. So it's time to eat my own cooking. The first thing I did was I looked around for a business model that allowed me to scale, that was still planning to keep the business small in terms of, well, I really only want to take on, as a fractional client at that point, I could only take on 3 clients. So I said, great. I have 3 clients, but how do I make that 6 clients?
So just to be clear, you were the first fractional COO for your own company, Scaling Management Consulting Group.
Correct.
Cool. And based on, kind of hourly workload and spending time with your daughter and wanting to have a life and run, which I know running has not been available for you because you broke your little toe. But to do all the things, you could take on about 3 clients and be their fractional COO.
Correct. Because I wanted to continue to add value to the rest of the community. So I was doing postings and YouTube videos and all those other things, and that would take time. And then I had to be mom. And so I really felt that it was a matter of 3 clients, 4 maximum. If it was a smaller client that I could add in, that was maybe only another half day. Because even though we say it's only going to be a day a week, for example, it's never a day a week. Right. We spend all sorts of time on the weekends, or we do things before or after other stuff. So it was never that. So I looked around for a business model, and I actually looked at the bookkeepers and the CPAs in particular. So often CPA firms will have bookkeepers in-house because bookkeepers are junior, and then the CPAs only come in to give you advice, be more strategic and less tactical. And I said, that's an interesting model. Let's test it out. So I brought in my first operations manager. worked beautifully. So I went from 3 clients to 6 clients, and I could take on those extra pieces. Not a problem. I was still, I made a boo-boo in doing 6 clients because each one still got a day.
Right.
So it was a little bit of a problem by the time the end of the week hit, but everybody got fulfilled. And so that was the business model that you've got, right? You've got where a COO comes in essentially for a day a week, give or take the hours, right? It ranges, whether there's more or less to do. And you've got an operations manager that's there between 15 and 20 hours a week.
Yep.
And that's the model that we've got for Scott. And that was, back then it wasn't 10,000, but when I have to pay other people, now it was $10,000 a month.
Right.
Because the way the business model works is it's almost an 80-20 rule. It's not quite, there's a little bit of a percentage point difference there, but it's about an 80-20 rule. So 80% goes to the contractors and 20% stays for the overhead.
Perfect. So
right?
you sourced Bob, you contract him out to me. You sourced Ashley, you contract her out to me. The company, Scaling Management Consulting Group, keeps about 20% profit margin, which is awesome because I have to imagine you have little overhead other than headhunting for these people. And then they get about 80%. And I even asked Bob, I was like, hey, man, like, I kind of guessed as much. I was like, excuse me, I'm guessing I'm paying about $5,000 or $6,000 for you. I was guessing he's probably getting about 70% of that money. I'm like, Bob, you're old. Like, you're quasi-retired. Why are you doing this? And he's like, well, I'm doing this for 3 reasons. One, I was part of a couple big tech companies where a couple times I was months away from having like FU big boy money, and either the company failed or something didn't work out in a merger or whatever. So he's like, I've got retirement, I've got good money, but I don't have FU money. So every month that I don't have to withdraw out of my retirement is like a win and more money I can leave to my kids. And he would say that publicly because he said it in front of 10 other people. That's why I'm comfortable saying it here on this call. And then he said, number 2, I've just have this knowledge base that I feel inclined to get out to people, and like, I just want to add value where I can to a younger generation. And number 3, with this income, I get to play private golf courses in my retirement instead of public golf courses in my retirement. I'm like, these are all very good reasons. And then he's made many jokes about how he's keeping me from having a heart attack and I'm keeping him from getting Alzheimer's. So it's kind of like a perfect mesh. But that totally made sense to me, right? And then I get this awesome quality in a CEO and an operations manager. So that's awesome for your business model. How are you sourcing these people? Because you just don't come across every day people that can be COOs in a multitude of other businesses or amazing operations managers. So how are you sourcing these people for your business now that you're scaling?
Great question. And so I found most of them actually because I was an EOS implementer at one point in time. I was trained for that. And so I have a community of implementers. A lot of implementers also tend to be integrators. And so speaking to people, the first round of people that came in, like Bob was one of those rounds, they're from that community. And then you know what happens, Scott? And this is what the beauty of the model that I've got now. But Bob and those other first round people, they are loving it here. They adore it. We haven't had people leave. They said, yeah, we just want to stay. We want to have some fun. And we want to, because you guys let us pick and choose our clients. Like, Scott, if Bob had come off that call and said, I don't want to talk to Scott ever again,
right,
you wouldn't have having Bob on your team.
Which, by the way, I have the type of personality that there are some people you could have put on that call where they're like, dude, I am not working with this ball of fire. Like, no chance. He cusses too much. He's got too many ideas. Like, this is not my wheelhouse. But Bob was willing to take on the challenge.
He was, and we thank Bob greatly.
Yes, every day.
And Ashley. And so great people, guess what they know? Great people. Now I go to my team when I'm doing a hiring round and I go, guys, I need to bring in some more people. Do you all know anybody who is already a fractional COO or integrator or operations manager, depending on what I'm hiring? And can you send them to come on forward? And I'd love to meet them if they're interested. So we come through and we do that. My first hire on my team was actually my chief culture officer. He's actually a team builder. And he's a former Olympian. His name's Bob Mollet. Fantastic guy. The team folks come and they talk to me. Then I send them over to Bob and Bob has a conversation with them, different Bob than your Bob. And then they come back to me. If both Bob and I say thumbs up, then we're good to go.
Nice. And I'm wondering, how do you find operations managers? Because operations manager to me sounds like the seventh circle of hell, like making sure that everything gets done and it's task oriented. And I'll share this because I've forgiven her and all is good. But we had on this big webinar that we did, we had a misfire on like some Zoom buttons and some integration, like didn't get clicked here. And then little did we know that the software that we use, Zapier or if this, then that, that's like firing these people over to these things. We only get like 500 zaps a month. And so then these people didn't get zapped there. And it's just, I'm going to cuss, I think for the first time in the podcast, we call it the daisy chain of fuckery, having to like plug all these softwares in, and like some password always has to get reset. Some service always has to get upgraded because now you have too many attendees or you have too many of this or whatever. So we had like a misfire and a bunch of people couldn't get on live, but they got the replay, whatever. Ashley beat herself up so hard on like that because, that's her zone of genius, right? Checking all these boxes and making sure all this stuff works. Having to do that and then having to suffer the ramifications when something goes wrong. Again, that sounds like the seventh circle of hell to me. So what are the personality traits, or how do you find these great operations managers? Like, because, visionaries or CEOs, they want to hire other people like them, right? I want to find like other salespeople who are super fired up and they want to do the stuff. And then I'm like, cool, sit down and do the work. And then they fail miserably because they're the creative type or the visionary type, and we totally hired the wrong person. So how do you find these world-class integrators and operations managers? Because like that everything about that personality type, interviewing them, it all sounds totally foreign to me.
Does it?
Yeah.
Good. It's a good thing you got Bob and Ashley.
Right. Shameless plug for continuing to pay them. I love it.
We use StrengthsFinder over here. And the thing that Bob and I always chuckle about is that we have a consistent profile. It's not done on purpose, by the way.
Right.
But everyone who comes through as a COO, an integrator, or an operations manager, they're all what we call lifelines. They're servant leaders. And so when we go out and we are having conversations with people, I don't need to use Indeed. I don't need to use a recruiter. I don't need to do any of these things because great people get referred to us all the time in order to become part of the team. So when we interview them, it's all about, well, we give them some real world test pieces, right? Can you follow a set of instructions like how I asked you to actually send me an introductory video of X number of minutes? And I am going to be particular at going, did you actually fall within the minutes?
Wait. So give me an example. When you're asking for somebody to interview with you, you give them some checkpoints of give us like the script or what you're using to find these people.
Yeah, so these guys don't even get a job description first, by the way,
okay,
because they've come in by referral. Okay. They know Ashley or they know Lillian or they know James or they know Jill or whoever it is. And they go, oh, hey, Mike talked to me last night at a cocktail party. And he said, when I said I was going to be looking for a new gig, he said I should contact you because I've got kind of the right experience. So great. Here's my LinkedIn profile. Mike said to send you that. And how can we communicate? Okay, so when I respond to them, I've looked at their LinkedIn profile. I don't care about your resume anymore. I'm sorry, it's kind of antiquated. I want a video because everybody sees everybody these days. I want to know what your background looks like. I want to know what you chose to say on that video. And then I'm going to do a little Googling and I'm going to go, okay, well, do you actually show up as the person you want to? Because we had somebody on a team once and we Googled and it was not good. And you're like, right. Wow, how could you not talk about that in the interviews? Like the big giant elephant in the room. But they didn't. So after we have some of these pieces and we ask them questions on this, hey, if you had this person and this business case, and we will use past clients in order to use real life business cases, what would you do? How would you advise, Scott, on this case? What would you do if you were Ashley and you accidentally did this thing and 500 people didn't make it? What would you do? What's your first thing? Is the first thing that you say apologize? Because it better be.
Right.
Because holy spokes, right? Then they come in and they talk to me. I want to know their story. I want to know who they are at their core, right? When you and I met, I knew what you were going to be like. I knew not to put you with Mike and to put you with Bob.
Yeah.
I had a pretty good sense of all of that after we talked for our half an hour. It was okay.
Right.
So they come in, they talk to me for that half an hour. And if they get past me and I feel, okay, you are an existing fractional. Because if people come out of corporate and they say, oh, I want to hang up my shingle, I got to say, usually they go back to corporate. And that's just not good for our clients. We don't want them cycling in and out. So little red flags in conversations can come up. If you pass me, you get a Strength Finder survey. If you get the Strength Finder survey, you get over to Bob. Bob's going to have a conversation. It's going to be booked for half an hour. It'll always take an hour because everybody loves Bob.
Yep.
And then Bob will give me a note. And sometimes Bob will say things like, ooh, that was transactional. One of our core values is that we build long-term relationships. If you can't build a relationship with Bob, who builds a relationship with everybody,
right?
That's a problem because we don't want that for our clients. We want somebody who is going to think of them first.
Right.
And so if you get a thumbs up from Bob and you get a thumbs up from me, then you come back and we're going to talk about the business model. We're going to talk about the compensation. We're going to talk about how it works for hours. We're going to talk about all those little logistics. And after you've heard that, then if you're still going, yep, you're absolutely, you want to join the team, then you get a contract.
Interesting.
Then we test you out.
And are you creating a stable of people before you find the potential client who's going to hire them, or do you go out to the field and find somebody once Scott Groves hits you up with a job need?
No, we've got a stable of people, and so I went from a solopreneur when we changed the business model to I've got now just over 25 people on the team. That's 18 months. So we've served over 1,100 clients at this point in time in different facets, right? Sometimes it's an hour, sometimes it's a full fractional experience like you've got, and you've got the highest tier, Scott. It's very interesting, but we always keep enough on our virtual bench because people cycle in and out. We're the business arm for these other existing fractional COOs and integrators.
Right. Fascinating. I've got a buddy who has a similar business model. My attorney, actually, Alex Bruno, shout out to Alex. We met in a professional development group, and he advertises himself as like, I am the small business attorney before you have enough revenue to bring in a full-time attorney. So, he's probably got, I'm just guessing, 100, 140 clients who, I'm never going to need a full-time business attorney, but I got to refresh my trust every once in a while. And then I'm going to negotiate a contract with a mortgage company who wants me to come in to do some training. And I need to make sure there's not something in there that prevents me from coaching my other clients. And, there's a million of these things that come up. So he's got, couple hundred clients like me, 140, 100, probably between 100 and 200 clients like me who just need fractional legal services, right? I would guess, I probably pay him a few $1,000s a year. He has limited overhead, multiply me by 100 or 200 people. That's a really great living just being a fractional service provider. So if I'm at the highest level, tell me where people with your business model might start. Maybe they just need like that 1 hour consult. Like, hey, I'm trying to solve this problem. I don't even need a full-time COO. I just need 5 hours worth of advice. What's kind of your entry level tier of getting people familiar with your business?
Yeah, we actually start at 3 hours a month. That's our entry level. And we do it as an automated thing. It's not the full customized experience only because it takes to onboard a client traditionally takes 20 hours of my time. Oh, wow. And so it's a real handheld type of experience. The client doesn't usually see that, but it's a lot of back end conversations. And what about this? Did you ask about that? And how, all of those things, when we're scoping things out appropriately. But when we start at the front end, anybody who's making more than $250,000 in annual revenue up to that $750,000, $800,000 mark, I'd say that's the sweet spot you want to start out. So we just launched actually scalingresources.com, which I'm super excited about because the whole point of that was to make sure that people had on-demand access to really great quality people who are COOs, integrators, and operations managers. You come in, for $800 a month, you get 3 hours with the COO, plus a whole bunch of digital tools and assets and all of these other things. We run events on a regular basis, and then you get all of that training, and you can also purchase additional hours if you want them or if you need them. But if you don't, that's fine too. right? 3 hours we found was the right amount when we tested it out last year.
Awesome. And do you mind if I ask what you charge hourly for that?
Oh, it's not hourly. It's a monthly recurring fee. So it's 800 because then you get the digital program that we've got. Then you get the events that we've got. So there's a whole bunch of things that are included that come up that we try to make sure we're being super topical. Look,
Perfect.
We find that there's a few macro trends out there right now that are taking place, right? We know that we are in recessionary times. We know that dollars are getting tight. We know that businesses are having to take that step back sometimes from thinking that they can afford this. And so how do you still make sure that you can help the maximum number of businesses add the most value with great experienced people, right, who are retiring? So they don't always want to retire and play golf 100% of the time.
Right,
Sometimes they want to just have some fun. And they have got this vast knowledge and experience. And why not tap into it, right? So we find that access is really helping these other businesses to struggle. And if we can make sure that it's cash flow positive for them and we're not impacting them negatively, that's the place to start.
Yeah, interesting. I've got two questions about those macro trends. One, how are you advising clients right now in this market, end of 2022? You know, depending on who you listen to politically, they might try to pretend like we're not in a recession, but we're in a recession. Inflation, whether it's inflation on goods or workers. I mean, my 20-year-old son, his girlfriend's getting, I think it's 18 or 21 bucks an hour at Chipotle to roll burritos because they can't find anybody to work. So, you know, businesses are dealing with huge inflationary pressures. I'd love to hear, one, what are the macro trends you're advising on? Well, let's go there, and then I'll ask the follow-up conversation about macro trends. Number one is, like, how are you advising your clients? I love the fact that you do knowledge dumps where all of your team members get together, and this is what we're seeing across industries. Like, who's thriving, who's dying, what advices are you giving on spending and overhead and all that kind of stuff?
Well, and that's just it, is that you've got to have your numbers. It always goes back to, if I'm going to ask you the question, well, how do you survive? I'm going to start by looking at your business model itself. And so I can't look at the business model if you don't know your numbers, if you don't know that profitability, you don't know that you're able to take things out. What's your operating cash flow look like? And yes, sometimes it means I'm going to give you some homework. Visionaries hate that, by the way.
Yeah, homework's the worst.
I know, but you're the one who's got the vision. So you're going to have to be the one to do the work. I'm sorry.
Perfect.
When it comes to some of this, a lot of the teams I find that we work with, it is team as the number one challenge and the number one expense. And so they're looking at it going, we just came through a pandemic where a lot of people did the great resignation thing. They're not in the workforce. So that made a problem where I had to compete more, pay more in order to actually get the team on board. Now that I've got the team on board and I'm paying them more, my profit margins have shrunk. And now my loans are costing more. The inflation numbers are going up. I mean, oh my gosh, it's insane. And they are going to want another raise. How do I afford this? Do I have to look at where do I have to cut expenses? That's number one. Is there something I need to do for my own pricing? What's the price sensitivity of what I offer? Okay, great. What are the other profitable pieces that we can wind up pulling? How about strategic relationships? How about referral programs, right? As opposed to always going to ad spend. You know, what are those different elements? And so it depends on the business model, but the team tends to be the number one thing that people wind up paying for. And so really trying to maximize the productivity and the utility of the team. And that doesn't mean work people to death.
Right.
That means how do we make sure we're making the best choices and putting people where they need to be for success of themselves and success of the company.
Yeah. And I'm trying to balance two thoughts in my mind right now. And maybe you can give me some coaching on this. And by the way, I think everybody we have on the team right now is like a talent. So I'm not currently dealing with this dilemma, but I have before. You know, thought number one is it is a giant pain in the ass to let somebody go, pay them some type of severance, hire somebody new, take a risk on somebody new, train them up to do the job. You know, you just lose months and potentially tens of thousands of dollars. So I'm trying to balance the thought of like, man, if I've got a B- to a B+ player, what is the headache involved with letting them go and replacing them? Versus, like, this might be a great time when people are getting laid off or companies are struggling to kind of top grade my talent and substitute a B plus player for an A plus player, they might cost the same, they might cost a little bit more, but as we talked about earlier, if you have A plus players, they pay for themselves because they generate so much more revenue than they cost you. So balancing those two thoughts of like, all right, somebody's watching this right now, they've got some B player talent and they're looking, in the mortgage industry, for example, I've got a loan officer assistant, a processor, an executive assistant. They're good, but not great. They're a B minus to a B plus. God, do I really want to go through the headache of this in this market of letting them go, bringing in somebody else, hoping that I interviewed correctly and I am top grading to an A plus player and them training them and all the stuff that goes with that versus like, no, man, this is the time to upgrade talent and you're going to have to do that to stay profitable during a recession. How do I balance those two thoughts, or what's the right answer?
I am going to give Chris a link to something that I did for some of my folks called The Cost of a Mishire. So I actually did a video on that. So we'll give you that over to your listeners to take a look at. But if you've got everyone on your team, there's usually a bottom 10%, right? Like, don't toss out the baby with the bathwater. That doesn't make sense.
Right.
You've got to do it in ways where, okay, so if you are having a problem with one team member, address that problem, because the cost to stick your head in the sand like an ostrich is huge. Even if they're a B player, what's the opportunity cost of not having an A plus player? Right? I'm sure they've done great things. I'm sure there's also costs. Yes, there's investment in making sure the other people come in, although with systems in place and onboarding processes, ultimately you'll have a little easier time getting the next person on board.
Right.
But I'd look bottom 10% first.
Bottom 10%, probably get rid of them.
It's funny. I talk about this with my team a lot, and it's really a matter of hire slow and fire fast. I know when I walk into meetings with people, if it's not a hell yes, I love that person, we need a conversation.
Right.
Because, oh my gosh, why is it not a hell yes? Why am I not in love with that team member? Maybe there's something that's going on with that person right now in their life.
Right.
Okay, that happens. But maybe they're not a fit. Please don't drag it out for either party. You're, as a company, you as the founder, you're going to hate it. And so are they.
Yeah.
They're not going to see it because they're not going to want to leave because they want the security. But ultimately, if they're not a fit, you're not doing them any favors.
Right. Yeah, this is reminding me of Jack Welch's book, the world famous CEO of GE. His book Winning. He talked about a couple of things. He was like, I can't remember if it was quarter or every year, I fire the bottom 10% of sales staff, period. Like sales staff and middle managers, bottom 10% by the metrics we established, they're gone, period. Number two, the hell yes or a hell no. He talked about that in the book. And the other thing he talked about that was pretty interesting is like, when you go to terminate somebody, they should be surprised. Because if they're not surprised, it means that you drug it on too long and you knew they weren't a fit and they knew it weren't a fit and maybe they were already looking for another job or there was kind of this great resignation. They had kind of silent quit. You weren't getting the most out of them. They weren't getting the most out of you. It wasn't a fit. You should be letting people go when it's kind of a surprise to them of like, hey man, we've identified this isn't a great fit. We want you to move on. We need to move on. We're going to take care of you in the transition. But if you get on a call and they're like, so are you firing me? It's like, oh, you probably waited somewhere between 3 months and 3 years too long to get rid of them because everybody kind of saw the writing on the wall. And I thought that was a really beautiful way to explain you doing the best thing by the employee and them doing the best thing by the company.
Correct. I couldn't agree with that more. You want people to be happy and fulfilled in their life. And sometimes that means you need to release them to succeed elsewhere.
Yeah, totally. I want to talk about one more kind of macroeconomic trend, and let's take out the Amazons and the Teslas of the world where like their business model is to run at a huge loss, continue to bring on venture capital money. I think Amazon was it was an unprofitable company for 12 years and their stock just kept going through the roof because like everybody saw the long-term goal. Let's assume we're not a tech startup. Let's assume we're not one of these, going to be Fortune 100 companies that one day, you're a smaller business, you're starting up, you're somewhere between $500,000 and $2 million in revenue. Again, Scott Groves here trying to balance two thoughts. One is in recessionary times, it might be a good time for the founder or the CEO to take less money, lean in, double down on the staffing, double down on the marketing, double down on the market exposure, and like really forego some profits to grow during a recessionary time. You know, the last recession 11, 12 years ago is when great businesses like Zoom were started. And I just said, let's ignore the tech companies, but I'm just using that as an example. So there's one like thought pulling on visionaries, like let's lean in, let's blow it off the rails. I don't care if I make any money this year because this is the year to grow and lean in when everybody's leaning out. And then the other thought I'm trying to balance with this is like the road to hell is basically paved with the intentions of scaling at all costs, right? So it's like, great, I could scale tomorrow to $3 million in revenue in this coaching business, but I would probably profit less. So do I want more headaches and more overhead and more expense to scale just for the sake of scaling, but I'm really not making any additional revenue, and I'm probably diminishing the quality of life for myself, my wife, my family, because we're scaling just for the sake of scaling. So balancing those two thoughts during a recessionary period of like, let's grow to grow and lean in when other companies are cutting their marketing budget and they're not providing the best service and whatnot. Let's grow because like we're going to capture more market share. And when the market turns around and I can charge more for coaching, profit margins go through the roof. Or, hey, Scott, you're trying really just to scale for ego, and there's really no extra profit or benefit here unless your goal is just to help more people and not make more money. So if I'm thinking those two thoughts, do you have a bias on one or the other, or some coaching there on how we can at least like frame this and think through these two different lenses?
That's a tough one. It's so individual, Scott, because some of our clients, they are all about, I really want to grow. That's my vision. That's my goal. And other clients, they've said, listen, I've grown, I've done well. Now I need to stabilize. I need to change my goal. My goal is not to double next year. My goal is not to 10x. I know we talk about these numbers because doesn't that sound cool at a cocktail party?
Right.
I 10x my business last year.
It's the Grant Cardone dilemma, right? Where he's like, you got to 10x. If you're thinking $1 million in revenue, think 10 million in revenue. If you think you can buy a $5 million commercial building, buy a $50 million commercial building. It's like, but there's a whole lot more risk of ruin in buying a $50 million commercial building versus a $5 million commercial building, bro. Like you got to take that stuff into consideration. So, maybe this is the 10x fallacy. We can name this clip or something. But so sorry, I cut you off, but it's like, I hate that. Like, let's just grow to grow. It's like, all right, well, there's a lot of mortgage companies that grew just to grow. And then they realize like, oh, if we were unprofitable funding one loan and now we're unprofitable funding 10,000 loans, it basically means we just scaled ourselves into bankruptcy. So
correct.
I can't square these two thoughts in my mind on what direction to go.
And it's very personal to the founder. We're going into such challenging times depending on who you listen to, it's more or less, but I think everybody can see the inflation, everybody can see the interest rates and all of that. Making sure that you have the ability to survive and thrive and really grow once it's over, critically important. So what's the goal is my number one question to that founder. So if you're listening, what's your goal? Is it going to be growth and scale? Is it going to be stabilization? Right? I don't know. But whatever your goal is, your business model has to feed that goal. So that's my point number 2 would be, what's your business model currently? Does it actually feed your goal? Or do you need to make shifts or changes? What levers do you need to pull to get to your goal? Royal Caribbean, when the pandemic hit, I'd read an article somewhere, I think it was on Entrepreneur or some such thing. And Royal Caribbean had 5 years of emergency funds in the kitty. Royal Caribbean had no trouble coming through the pandemic, right? Other cruise lines were not so lucky. Their kitty was not so big. So what do we need to make sure that we're doing? Because you're absolutely right. If you have something that's a bad decision on one point of sale and you scale that and you're losing money now 10 times more, you're gone. You're never going to survive. And why would you wind up doing that? You need to know your downside risk. Profit is great. By the way, profit is lovely. We love to talk about profit margins, but operating cash flow is a great thing to talk about. So that's how much money is actually in your bank account. How much money can you pull from? If something happened to your business and you needed to pay the team, what's your operating cash flow? I just found out this summer, I was doing this manually for my own business for a while, and I just found out that it's actually a thing, a report that comes out of most accounting softwares. Who knew?
Who knew?
I don't have to do that
QuickBooks for the
manually
win.
anymore.
QuickBooks for the win. And I have to imagine, I have a reoccurring business model of coaching where we charge reoccurring fees for coaching. I have to imagine that's why those businesses have become so valuable, right? The next Netflix or, Amazon Prime subscriptions now equate for a huge amount of the profit margins for Amazon. Like anything that's gone to a reoccurring revenue subscription model, all the way down to if you order socks on Bombas, Bombas, I think one of their options is like, hey, we know you're going to run out of socks. How about we just send you a new, 4 pair of socks every 3 months or something, right? Because that operating cash flow and knowing that there's a consistency. I've got a friend that runs a massive nonprofit, and he's like, the truth is, we rather have a bunch of $99 a month donors that are going to donate in perpetuity than to have Scott Grove strike a check for $5,000 or $10,000 as a one-time gift, because our operating capital is more easy to project when we have those, those subscribing members. So how does that play into it? Like operating capital, I don't need to keep a lot of money on hand. Maybe I have 2 months of payroll just in case everybody drops out of coaching at one time, and it's going to take me 2 months to wind down the business and say, well, I gave it a good try. I can at least pay everybody for a couple months. But can you talk a little bit about what that operating cash flow actually means?
Well, it will be a little different depending on what business model and business and industry you're in, right? So for example, a coaching business is a great example. You have obligations. Some people pay annually. They might have an expectation that if you went into trouble at the beginning of their annual payment, that you would still fulfill for the rest of the year, or you would have to refund, right? And do you have the operating cash flow, but in the bank that says, I can pay you back?
Right.
So asking the business, what kind of obligations do I have that if I stopped selling today, no money came in, what do I need to fulfill on? So we talked about Amber. Big shout out to Amber. She's absolutely amazing. And she does book launches, right? So you come in and you have a book launch here, maybe 6, 8 months, depends on when the publisher decides everything. And so if I was asking her this question, she would have a different answer than you, Scott, because her clients have 6 to 8 months where, if it happened at the very beginning, I'm still obligated to fulfill on the contract that we have.
Yeah.
And so how would we make sure she's got enough money is different than you. But ultimately, I would make sure I'm looking at those accounts and reports. Maybe you have a fractional CFO. Maybe you have an accountant. Maybe you have a bookkeeper that can give you a management report that says, okay, you currently have in the bank enough money for a week, a month, a year, if you made no more sales. What does that number need to be? And the recurring piece is so nice because it does make things predictable. If you knew you had enough money coming in on contract for the next 12 months to cover every expense that you have, that's a great place to be in.
Amazing. I love that. And then, I wonder this question, how often do you as a COO have to step in and tell founders, hey, this project or this idea on scaling, is that more ego or is that a real business decision? Because I have to imagine, I won't use their name, but there was a coaching company that called me. We were going to do something together. We were going to do some co-branded coaching and stuff like that. And I'm totally transparent. I'm like, hey, if you have a service that my coaching clients need that I'm offering, great. Like, I want to provide that. And then at one point, I don't know if this was the intention of the call, but after we got about an hour into the call, they mentioned, they're like, well, we could always just buy your company. And then we could do like a merger or something like that. I'm like, great, 3 times revenue. Here was my revenue from last year. Here was my net profit. You want to stroke me a check for $2.5 million? Let's do it, man. You buy the company away. And they're like, wait a minute, you made how much from how many coaching clients with what profit model? And then what I realized is, as much as I love these guys, I think they're wonderful guys. I think they're doing great stuff in the real estate and mortgage coaching business. They're scaling just for the sake of scaling. And I think there's some ego there because, the pool of loan officers who need coaching is actually fairly finite. Maybe there's only 25 or 30,000 potential coaching clients in the entire country. And so I was looking at it, I was like, dude, if you're not making money at the level where you're currently running your business, you're not going to get to a point where you're making money. And maybe, I'm projecting here, or I'm guessing, maybe they're just scaling for the sake of scaling, and it's more of an ego thing. And there's some other, avenues where maybe they're using that coaching business to recruit for a specific mortgage company, which I hate that, by the way, but whatever. And how often do you have to step in and give people a little bit of a reality check of like, hey, are we doing the best thing for the business, or are we doing the best thing for your ego?
Every quarter, I ask all of my founders.
Every 90 days, a founder needs to be hip checked by Susan to be like, hey, man, is this ego or is this growth?
It's part of our strategic planning. It's going to be the first series of questions. Hey, what did we do right last quarter? What can we improve on last quarter? And what's the vision for the next quarter? Let's talk about it. Because the vision sets the compensation and all of that for the next 6 hours that we're going to talk about team and products and profitability, because it needs to be in alignment with the founder and CEO's goals. So I need to know. Seek to understand, but then I have to ask the questions, the hard questions. That's my job as a COO.
And then once you understand, you can go to the founder and be like, hey, man, this is not in alignment. I don't know why you're thinking of this. Either you got a wild hair up your behind, or this is ego, or this is like misplaced energy. But like, this does not align with the vision we talked about 2 months ago. Is that a fair assessment about how you might have to have the tough conversation with really the person who's employing you?
My client, absolutely. But sometimes that's what we need. You're a coach, Scott. Sometimes You have to tell people the hard truth and say, okay, I had a client once who loved to do end runs. You know what an end run is?
No.
An end run is where as a COO or integrator, I am your second in command. And every time you run around me to do something because you don't like my answer and my answer will be no, or let's talk about it next week on our same page meeting, because I know it's one of those things that need to be in the long-term parking lot, because you're going to take the team and move them completely sideways. And then in 2 more days, you're going to be really frustrated because nothing got done.
Right.
Hey, you got to stop going around me. If you don't stop going around me, then there's no reason for me to be here. That's fine. That's totally your choice. You are the founder. You are the one in control.
Yeah. See, in America, we call those an end around. So I knew what you were talking about. I just didn't know you're saying for it. Finally, I got something out of you that sounded Canadian.
Really? Because it came from the EOS model.
You haven't said A. You haven't said A at least like one time. So I don't know if you're a real Canadian.
I do not do A. Come on.
A.
My language.
We got to get your business in the right way. A. It's like Americans were horrible at saying and Canadians usually say A. Like it's like just a holding word for when I can't think of what I want to say. It's yeah. Okay. Now I gathered my thoughts. All right.
And millenniums say
like, oh, great. I hate that worse. That's like that Valley Girl, from the 80s. Like, they're like, and then, and there's that weird, by the way, I could never hire somebody that talks like that stereotypical 80s Valley Girl from all the coming of age movies. If you put an overemphasis on the last syllable of the word, there's no way I could hire that person. I'd be like, you're going to drive me effing nuts. So shout out if you're applying for a job with Scott Groves, do not emphasize the last syllable of every one of your words or we're not going to work together. Not that a whole lot of people
shout out for me. If every other word is like, we're going to have
yeah, not working for you. Although I am glad that you stuck me with people that could handle pretty much every adjective, verb, and adverb that I use is the F word. So we have a perfect model match there of people that are helping us. All right, I want to close because I know your time's super valuable on what's the thing that I forgot to ask, or what's the part of running a fractional COO business that I'm not asking. What did I miss?
There's so much in that one, man, Scott. What did you not ask? What did we not cover? We covered team. We covered macro. We covered vision. I got to go back to data.
All right, go to the data.
I got to go back to data because
silly scientists.
I know. Dang it. The data is so important. If you want to improve, you need to know where you are. And so many people are so busy running around doing, they forget to take the time to evaluate the data. Take the time to evaluate the data, please, even if it's 20 minutes. If you have somebody on your team, I have a guy on my team whose sole responsibility is every Monday Well, it's not his sole responsibility. That would be silly. But every Monday he gives me a sheet. It's all the marketing metrics. I keep adding to it. He's not happy with me
Perfect.
about that. But I need to know that when I look across that row, I'm looking for certain red flags. And if I don't see it, great. I have spent a great 30 seconds scanning that row. Off we go on to the next one. And if I see one of my leading indicators that's off, I know to dig in. But if I don't have that eyeball look on my data, I'll never know what to do. Can I leave you with a second one?
Sure. Can I give a plug for data real quick?
Yeah.
One of the things that we do in our mortgage coaching is the 5 C's. So how many calls did you make? How many contacts are coming in, AKA leads? How many credit pools? How many contracts? And then how many closings? And I tell people all the time, if you're working for a manager in the mortgage business who's only tracking your closings, they're 9 months behind. Like, that's not a good leader, because it's the calls that lead to the leads or the contacts, which leads to the credit pools. You show me any loan officer in the country's number of credit pools per week or per month, I can almost project for you, like, down to a couple $1,000s, what they're going to make 6 months from now, 5 months from now, a year from now. So like, I'm a big fan of data. And what's interesting in these recessionary times, the people in my coaching business that are tracking their 5 C's, they're also the ones that aren't freaked out. Because they're like, hey, I'm making the calls, which is leading to this many contacts, AKA name and phone numbers or name and email addresses. I'm pulling this many credit reports. So maybe these people are a little spooked right now by interest rates, or they're spooked by prices or whatnot. They're kind of on the bench. But if they let me pull their credit, I know they're going to become a client who closes a mortgage at some point during the next 12 months. So my clients that aren't tracking, they're freaking out. They're like, where's my next deal coming from? I don't know my matrix, blah, 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 blah. The people that are tracking and do know their, not matrix, their metrics, they do know their metrics. They're like, all right, well, at least the leads are coming in. The market's going to be what the market's going to be, and it will take care of itself at some point in the future, as long as I have a process for staying in touch with them. So I'm a big fan of data. And let's go to your number 2 that I might have just completely cut off your train of thought.
Nope, I wrote it down. But before we do that, you added another one to just do another plug for understanding your customer journey, because those numbers, those pieces, as an owner of a business, you need to go back and understand where your customer journey is. We looked at that in July. I know we got off on sidetrack, but where I was going to go with that particular story was when I looked at it and I looked at all the different steps across the funnel, there was one lever in particular that if I take that as an 8% close, which currently it is through the funnel, and we move it to 20%, so we've got to do some work to get it to there. That is a business game changer on the profit side.
Amazing.
But if I hadn't done the work, if I hadn't looked at the numbers, if I hadn't mapped that customer journey and really had people ask me questions, because sometimes after delving in and doing all the stuff, you're like, I'm so close to it, I can't see the forest for the trees anymore. Right? Okay.
Well, I'm going to give you another quote from my coach. You'll love this one if you haven't heard it before. It's really hard to read the label when you're sitting on the inside of the jar. He goes, once in a while, you got to take a step back. You got to be the CEO and the COO of your business. And to read the label, you can't be in the jar because you're just too knee deep. You can't read the tea leaves. So I love that. Okay. Number 2. Sorry, I keep cutting you off.
All good. Thinking time. Taking the time, 20 minutes a week at a minimum, to think about one question on your business. Whatever that most topical conversation you're having with yourself at 3:00 in the morning that's keeping you awake, you got to solve it and move on. Thinking time. You know who does really great for this is Keith Cunningham. And he's fun. The Road Less Stupid was his book. And he's got about 700 different thinking time questions in that book. It's massive.
I love that. And do you ever give that to your team? So like maybe on Monday, I would be like, hey team, this is kind of the question for the week that we're noodling over. Come to me on Friday with some ideas or some questions. Or is this more like founder time? I need to turn off the distractions, go to Starbucks and, for half an hour over an iced tea, write out all the things I'm thinking about on that question. Like, will both of those work? Or is this really just a founder CEO thing?
So I actually do it 2 different ways. And depending on who my team is, depending on the structure of them, it's really meant for the CEO and the founder.
Okay.
So your thinking time is at a different level. Your vision of the business and what you're seeing is never going to be the same as everybody on your team. It just isn't, right?
Right.
Your objectives, those things that you may not want to share with the team, they're still in your mind. The thinking time is going to help you. But if you have a challenge, so I just did this with my team because I'd asked them the question with one of our last sessions. I said, okay, we have literally no referral program in place, no official referral program. As COOs and integrators, we like to be backseat people. We don't like to ask for things. That's just not we are not closers.
Right.
We're just not, because that's not our sweet spot. And so being able to have that conversation and having them step out of their comfort zone was a bit of a training tool for the people who are fractional on my team. I wanted you to be thinking about this in a variety of different ways. So we had a great 45-minute conversation. Perfect. That's twofold. One, I didn't have to do it alone because 2 heads are better than 1, 4 heads are better than 2. And 2, I got you thinking about things, and some great pieces came out of that.
I love that. I love that a lot. I'm going to put this on my list or you can give the coaching to Bob, my COO. It's like, hey, let's start asking Scott a question on Monday and then have him report back on Friday with some answers. So that can be some coaching for you to Bob to me. All right, last 2 questions because I feel like you can learn so much about somebody with this, and then I promise we'll let you go. Question number 1, and I could have you on for hours just so we could talk about like the political reality on the ground in Canada. I want to hear all kinds of stuff about living in Canada the last couple of years. But what, if anything, now that COVID's mostly in the rearview mirror, we're getting back to a lot more in-person meetings. Your business has obviously seen explosive growth in the last couple of years. What are you most looking forward to? And this could be, for you and your daughter personally, or this could be professionally. What is Susan most excited about going into 2023?
One word: travel.
Yes.
I used to travel 3 times a year at a minimum. That was really hard, sitting still and not going anywhere. That was tough.
Love it.
So I'm looking forward to travel. My daughter indicated that she really wanted to go back. So actually just the month before everything shut down, we did a cruise. It was one of the fun things that we got to do. And I'm so glad we did it at that point in time.
Right,
We
right.
didn't get canceled. I asked my daughter where the first place is that she wants to go. And she wants to go back to Symphony of the Seas. I said, really? And she said, yeah, I really want the ice cream. I said, okay, if I just got you an ice cream dispenser, could we go somewhere else?
Perfect. So I love the travel, and I love that all kids, their number one priority is ice cream, because my son would be like, as long as there's Slurpees, Dad, as long as there's a 7-Eleven that we can go get a Slurpee, let's go wherever. Thank God Mexico has Slurpees. Question number 2, and I'll leave you on this. Favorite movie and why?
Ooh, can I say that I'm a Marvel fan?
Yeah, of course.
I just absolutely love it. I just started another Marvel series tonight, actually, while I was queuing up ready for you. And favorite one. I'm a big fan of Black Panther.
Excellent movie.
It was a great movie. Lots of fun, lots of tech, great science fiction. I don't know. Science person loves science fiction. How surprising is that, right?
Yeah, not shocking. I always love when people watch Marvel movies and then they're like, oh, that was so unrealistic that whatever. They time traveled and eliminated half the people, and the grass was cut. Like, if half of civilization is gone, how are they going to be cutting the grass? I'm like, really? The cut grass? That's where your suspense of disbelief was. Like, the time travel didn't bother you. The guy turning into the big green Hulk, that was totally understandable, but some weird nuance in the movie, that's where you drew the line. And I love when people are like watching Game of Thrones or something, they're like, well, that's not how a real sword fight would go down. And I'm like, oh, but the dragons, that's totally in your wheelhouse. Like, you were willing to accept that, but the sword fight just wasn't realistic enough for you. So I don't know if you're that kind of scientist, but I always love when people watch movies super analytical, and I'm like, bro, this is just supposed to be a release. That's why it's called like a release to all the stuff in our brain. That's why it's a superhero movie.
Also, I think that's our first repeat.
That might be our first repeat of somebody in the same movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. So you're in good company. Many people, apparently, that's their favorite movie.
Nice. Well, I gotta say, I love the fact that earlier on you're talking about House of Dragon, because I've gotten into that one as well. I actually rented Crave just so that I could see that. I'll cancel it after it's done because it won't come back for another year.
Perfect.
But I'm just like, yeah. I don't watch movies usually. Now, if they are science movies like Contagion or something, I'm going to have it with a little bit of a science eye. But if I'm going to Marvel, I'm going to enjoy the movie for the fact that it's a fun movie. If I'm going to see Top Gun's Maverick, I am not sitting there caring about all of the little idiosyncrasies. I just want to enjoy the 2 hours. Thank you.
Totally, totally. And by the way, since you're a scientist, this movie kind of flew under the radar and was not nearly as popular as it should have been. Have you seen the movie Arrival?
I have not.
Oh, put it on the list. It's called Arrival. It's a science fiction of, aliens arrive on Earth. And the whole movie is basically about the scientific process of how we would learn more about them, how we would interact with them, how we would learn their language without basically starting World War III. It's a phenomenal, science-driven movie with a very cool twist at the end, and I think you're gonna love it, especially since you have that scientific mind. You're gonna be like, oh, I see what they're doing here, and it's a phenomenal movie that for some reason just didn't get enough traction. Maybe it was too smart for the American audience, but I as a little bit of a movie snob, I gotta say that's probably one of the best movies of the last decade and totally flew under everybody's radar.
Ooh, well, I've got that one on the list. I will make sure to watch it at some point soon. So you do watch movies then to just enjoy the movie? You're not going to sit there and go, I couldn't stand her haircut the entire time like my mother does?
Yeah, no, I get into two modes. I get into I just want to zone out, have a beer or some nachos at the theater and just enjoy the stupidity, right? And as now that I have kids, a lot of those are stupid cartoon movies, which I can still find enjoyment in. And then other times I'm I'll see some review on a movie that's super critical or super positive or super negative, and okay, now I'm watching this with the film snob hat on, how was the cinematography, were the costumes in style for what they were trying to represent there, and I'll get all super nerdy and just total loser, and then I usually go to Facebook and argue with my friend Matt Esplanda, who has a cinematography background. I'm here's why I think I hated this movie. You tell me why, as a movie snob, I really hated it. And he's no, you were spot on. Or he's you totally missed the point, bro. Go back and watch the movie through this lens. And I always go to him as my movie connoisseur. So fun times.
Nice. I love that.
Cool.
Love that.
Well, Susan,
what have I not asked you, Scott, that your audience might need to know about you?
That's a really good question. You're the first person that asked that. I think I need to decide with the coaching business, pick a number, $2 million in revenue. Do I want to get there because it actually serves more clients and it serves my family better and it can completely replace my mortgage income? Or do I still love doing the mortgage business from time to time and I'm really just growing for the sake of ego? That's kind of the thing I'm trying to work out with Bob, because we're in a really nice holding pattern right now with where we are. And I definitely want to have you back on for another talk after we hit, whether it's this year or next year at $1 million of revenue. But I kind of have to really do some soul searching and decide what the next step is in that business. I'm not sure.
I love that. What a great conversation to have.
Yeah. So we'll have you on. We'll have you on again when we're ready to have that conversation. Thanks for your time, Susan. I know it's super valuable. And what's the easiest way for people to get in touch with you, either social media, website, where should they start the conversation if they're thinking that they probably need some of your services?
Probably going to scalingresources.com.
Perfect.
Everything that's an email through there. It's a free sign up. Go ahead and you get some free tools with you and connect with me.
Perfect. We'll connect everybody there. Thanks again for being on.
Thank you so much, Scott. It was so much fun. Thank you.